Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a young man named Chinua. He earned a living as a palm wine tapper. Chinua was married to a beautiful woman named Isioma. His love for her was deep and he would do anything for her. When Isioma became pregnant, he provided support and comfort as they prepared for the arrival of their child. Each day, after tapping the palm trees for wine, he would bring the fresh wine home first, eager for Isioma to taste it. He wanted her to enjoy the drink before he hurried off to the market to sell it. One cool morning, Chinua walked along the village carrying a calabash of freshly collected palm wine. Chinua's mind was focused on getting home quickly because, as he always did, he wanted his wife to taste the palm wine first before he sold any of it. Suddenly, he spotted the prince of the village coming towards him with two guards following behind. When the prince and his guards got closer, Chinua greeted the prince with a deep bow, showing the respect that every villager had for royalty. The prince, dressed in fine attire, smiled as he responded to Chinua's greeting. Then, the prince noticed the calabash Chinua was carrying had palm wine in it. He could smell the rich, sweet scent of the fresh wine and decided that he wanted to have some. Chinua, nervous but respectful, hesitated before answering. He told the prince that he could not share the wine just yet, though he didn't say why. The prince's smile quickly turned into a frown of disbelief. He was shocked that Chinua, a simple villager, would say no to him. In the prince's mind, Chinua should have felt honored that a prince was asking for his wine. The prince said he would pay for the wine, thinking this would change Chinua's mind. But Chinua, still polite but firm, said he would bring some wine to the prince later that day at the palace. The prince's expression grew colder, his pride wounded by what he saw as disrespect. He was not used to anyone saying no to him, especially not a common man like Chinua. Anger filled the prince's heart, and without thinking twice, he ordered one of his guards to take the entire calabash of palm wine from Chinua. The guard, tall and strong, stepped forward and reached for the calabash. Chinua tried to hold onto it, but the guard was far stronger. Despite Chinua's struggle, the guard easily pulled the calabash away from him, spilling some of the precious wine on the dusty ground. Then, the guard tossed a few cowries at Chinua's feet. The cowries scattered across the ground, rolling into the dirt, as if he was throwing scraps to a beggar, showing no respect for Chinua's hard work. Chinua stood there, staring at the cowries on the ground, feeling a mix of anger and shame, while the prince and his guards walked away, talking and laughing as if nothing had happened. As the sound of their voices faded into the distance, Chinua's hands balled into tight fists and his face burned with anger. After standing there for some time, Chinua thought he should return to the palm forest to get another calabash of palm wine. With steady hands, he climbed the rough, towering tree. As he reached the top, his grip slipped. He fell, crashing to the ground, and his life slipped away from him before he could even realize what had happened. Some time later, another palm wine tapper passed by and saw Chinua lying motionless on the ground. Fear gripped him As he understood what had happened, he quickly called out for help, and soon others arrived. And together, they gently lifted Chinwa's lifeless body and carried him back to his home. When they reached Chinwa's home, his wife Isioma came out to see what was happening. Her heart shattered as she saw her beloved husband, his body cold and still, lifeless before her. She broke down in uncontrollable tears. In her heart, she didn't want to believe what she was seeing. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She knelt beside him, reaching out to touch his hand, calling his name over and over, begging him to wake up, as if hoping he was only playing a cruel joke on her. But no matter how many times she called, there was only silence, and reality slowly settled in. Her husband was gone forever. 3 days later, after Chinua was laid to rest, life returned to normal for everyone else in the village except for Isioma. She could not find peace. Her grief ran deep, and it weighed heavily on her, especially as she carried Chinua's child. Instead of preparing joyfully for the birth of her child, she was lost in sorrow, unable to shake off the pain of her husband's death. Each day, she would sit by Chinua's grave, talking as though Chinua could hear her, sharing her heart's burdens, telling him about their baby who would soon arrive. As she spoke, her voice often cracked, and her words would fade into sobs. She would cry until her tears ran dry. Sometimes, the grief was so heavy that she would fall asleep there on Chinua's grave. As the days passed, Isioma grew weaker. Her body became thin from her refusal to eat. She would go an entire day, sometimes more, without food. Her spirit too broken to care for herself. Her mother, who had stayed by her side to help during this time, watched with growing fear. She was deeply worried about Isioma's health and the life of the unborn child. Many times, she tried to comfort Isioma, telling her to take care of herself for the sake of her baby. But Isioma's love for Chinua was so deeply rooted that she could not let go. His memory lived on in her heart, strong and painful, as though he had never left. Life felt hollow without him, and no words or comforts seemed able to fill the emptiness he had left behind. One day, Isioma was returning home from the herbalist hut. She saw two palace guards standing by the side of the pathway. She greeted them and walked past, but she noticed that they were both looking at her with questioning looks, and she wondered why. Suddenly, she heard one of them calling out to her to come to them. Isioma had a slight frown on her face because they could obviously see that she was heavily pregnant. But instead of walking up to her, they wanted her to walk to them. To avoid trouble, Isioma walked closer to where they stood to answer their call. One of them asked if she was the wife of Chinua, and she said yes. Then she politely asked if there was a problem. But he told her that she could continue on her way, that there was no problem. Relieved but curious, Isioma turned and continued on her way. She had barely gone 6 steps when she heard one of them spoke, his voice low but clear. He mentioned her husband, Chinua, and how the prince had taken his keg of fresh palm wine earlier that morning on Afo market day. As Isioma kept walking slowly, she heard the same guard mentioned that by evening of that very day, he heard that Chinua had died after he fell from a palm tree. The other guard chimed in, saying that Chinua might have climbed back up the palm tree to fetch another keg after the prince had taken the first one. They continued talking, but their voices became unclear because of the distance. When Isioma got home, she went straight to the small grave where her husband, Chinua, was buried. As she knelt by the grave, tears rolled down her cheeks. She cried as she thought about everything she had heard from the palace guards. Her heart was heavy with pain and anger. She remembered how Chinua would always come home smiling, carrying a keg of sweet palm wine. He always made sure she tasted the fresh wine first before rushing to the market to sell it. She imagined him happily coming home with his keg of fresh palm wine before he met the prince on the way. She felt that if the prince had not taken the entire keg of palm wine that morning, Chinua would not have gone back to climb the tree again. He would still be alive. She also imagined how upset Chinua must have been when the prince took the wine. She felt that his anger might have made him careless. Maybe because of his anger, he forgot to check the climbing rope properly. Maybe that was why he fell from the tall tree. These thoughts made her cry even harder. Isioma's heart was filled with bitterness. She felt it was unfair that her husband, a good and hardworking man, had been treated so badly. The prince, who already had everything, had taken something so small but precious to them. That small act had changed everything, and now Chinua was gone forever. She thought about how the prince continued to live his life without care, as though nothing had happened, while his actions had brought everlasting sorrow to her. The bitterness in her heart grew stronger as she thought about the injustice. She made up her mind that the prince could not escape the consequences of what he had done. He had to pay for the pain he had caused. That evening, Isioma went to see a powerful priestess. She explained everything to the priestess and begged the priestess to help her find a way for her husband's spirit to punish the prince for his cruelty. The priestess gave her a small powdery substance wrapped neatly in banana leaves and told her that at midnight she should sprinkle the powder over her husband's grave, call his name 3 times, and then tell him what she wanted his spirit to do. When midnight came, Isioma walked to her husband's grave. She unwrapped the banana leaves and carefully sprinkled the powder over the grave. She called her husband's name 3 times and told his spirit to avenge his death by taking away something precious from the prince, just as the prince's actions had taken away something so precious from him. At the palace, the prince slept soundly in his grand chamber. In just 2 days, he was to be crowned as the heir to the throne. His day had been filled with so much preparations of stepping into the role he had been groomed for since birth. Suddenly, the prince woke up, his eyes wide and his breathing heavy, as if he had a nightmare. He sat up in his bed, his expression confused. His room felt strange to him. A strange thought gripped his mind that he did not belong there. It was as though a deep voice within him was telling him that his true purpose in life was to become a palm wine tapper. The feeling grew stronger and more urgent filling him with an unshakable need to leave the palace. Without hesitation, he quietly gathered a few cowries for his journey, careful not to wake anyone. The palace was still and silent, the guards unaware of his movements as he slipped out into the cool night. Under the cover of darkness, he left the life he had known behind, walking away from the throne and his destiny as a king because he felt he would only find true happiness in living a simple life as a palm wine tapper. For days, the prince journeyed across unfamiliar lands and finally settled at a clan where no one recognized him. There, he settled among the people as a palm wine tapper, embracing the life he believed was meant for him, and he was indeed happy. Years went by, and the prince never returned to the palace. His younger brother was chosen to become the new crown prince and became the king when his father passed.